everybody. Mike Rollins here. Today is the first in my series of interviews with candidates for the upcoming vacancy in the chair of the Texas Democratic Party. Today I'm joined by Kendall Scudder. Say hi to everybody to Kendall.
Hi, everybody.
So I've asked each of the candidates to submit a biography, and then we're going to dive right into the questions. So Kendall is a grassroots activist who's dedicated his life to building the Texas Democratic Party, serving on every level of leadership, including precinct chair, club president, interim county chair on the state Democratic Executive Committee, and currently as the vice chair for finance. He holds a bachelor's degree, and I've seen him in most of those roles. I think he left out that he ran for state senate also. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Sam Houston State University and a master's in political management from George Washington University. He has demonstrated his commitment to reform when he spearheaded initiatives to further transparency and accountability with the TDP finances, including transparent budgets and permanent cyclical auditing. I'm sure I'll talk a little bit about those too. He and his wife, Carly, reside in historic Old East Dallas, a wonderful neighborhood for those of you who don't know Dallas,
Love it.
where
Yeah.
he currently serves as an elected director of the Dallas Central Appraisal District. So, good afternoon, Kendall. It feels like it's starting to be a nice spring day out there for a
I
change.
know. I think we've gotten the last of winter, and unpopular opinion alert. I am a cold weather guy, and so
Uh,
I'm a little sad that we've already seen the end of our winter.
yeah, some people I know who know me have probably heard me say this, but in the north, people welcome spring and the coming of summer because winter is so miserable. In the south, people welcome the fall
Yeah.
because summer is just such a hellhole. Anyway, so this is going to be kind of conversational. I'm going to try not to get interruptions, but right now I need to silence my phone because somebody just decided they have to get in touch with me. Okay,
You're a man in
so
high demand, Mike Rollins.
probably people want me to buy something or give them money. Um,
Was that an option? Do I get to ask you for money?
I think you already have. Hey, I'm already a sustaining donor, Kendall. You know that.
Oh, good. I'm glad to know that. I am too.
Um, so I'm going to ask you first a little bit about yourself, give people a chance to know a little bit more about the person behind the persona they see up on the debate forum. Just like to remind people that we try to keep these to about an hour. I know this being the 28th, Kendall is going to head off for the forum in Lubbock imminently. So I don't think we can run much beyond an hour. Uh, and Kendall was asking me before we got on how I kind of felt the whole thing was going. And I'm learning a lot about the candidates. I'm forming my opinions about who should be in the pack and who shouldn't be. But the whole thing, especially in talking to some of my constituents in the 32nd Congressional District, kind of feels a little surreal to me. Uh, for one thing, people don't really understand what the state party is and what it does. They don't understand, they kind of understand what their county party does. They understand their precinct chairs, but where the state party fits into the whole ecosystem as opposed to the national party, as opposed to the Democratic House Campaign Committee, which is the state level, the DCCC, the national, the whole alphabet soup. They
Right.
don't really get it. So they don't understand why, it kind of feels like a little bit of a navel gazing. They don't understand what the state party chair is, what to do. And kind of the feeling I'm getting from it too is despite the fact that we had a huge turnout in Grand Prairie last weekend, it all feels a little bit surreal. I don't get the sense of feeling in these discussions about state party chair that really the gravity of the current situation we're in nationally is coming through. So I kind of like to look at this whole series of interviews kind of through that lens too. It kind of feels to me like, we're out in the backyard trying to, plan the spring garden while a band of ruffians is actively trying to tear down the house. It's so that's kind of where we are. So About you, Kendall. I know you talked a little bit about your upbringing in East Texas. Would you like to get into a little more depth about that?
Well, sure, but let me comment just a second on what you just said. You're absolutely right. It almost feels like you're rearranging seats on the Titanic. Everybody's trying to figure out how to just make it through this and resist the best ways possible. And there's a really long runway in this election. Chairman Hinojosa announced his resignation the Friday after the election, and
Yep.
so here it's a 6 month runway where the party almost feels like a rudderless ship. And uh, that's very scary. But what it also means is the day after this chair's election, our chair needs to be able to sprint forward.
Mhm.
There is no time for us to sit around trying to figure out, where all the bathrooms are. There's a lot at stake, and
Yeah.
that's where I do think that I bring a bit of a unique perspective. And this kind of segues into the question of telling you a little bit more about myself.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested too in your collection of kitsch on your table behind you.
Oh, this one right here. Okay, so I'll tell you. So I collect political memorabilia. If you can't tell from my,
Yeah.
um, but behind me right here, Jim Beam used to do decanters. They would do from 1956, I think, until 1988. They would do them every presidential election year, donkeys and elephants. And so I have the whole donkey collection.
Hmm.
So this one's the weirdest one. This one is from 1984. It was kind of the technology age. And so it's a decanter that Jim Beam, but it doesn't really fit in with the rest of them. But it's a fun little chat collection. I have a bunch of fun donkey stuff. I've been collecting them forever because I've been doing this since I was a kid. So that kind
So
of
you are like Democrat to the bone.
I mean, it's just always been just kind of it's run through my veins. And the reason it's run through my veins is because I come from a family where if the Democratic Party wasn't advocating for us, nobody was.
Hmm.
I grew up with lesbian mamas in East Texas. And, there were people that if they had their way, I would have been pulled out of my home and put in foster care. We were denied access to hospital rooms. I have there was at one point when I was growing up, my stepmother, who was a paramedic, was driving an ambulance, got hit by a drunk driver, and she was in the hospital and broke both of her legs, and we weren't sure if she was going to make it. But our family wasn't allowed in the hospital room, and if she died, we would have lost our home. And so, like, there was just kind of this different level of experiences that we had. That thankfully, people now that we have legalized marriage and family units, it's not as pressing as it was then, but there's still people trying to bring us back. And so for
Mhm.
me, the party has always been very important because it advocated for me and my family. And I think we have an obligation to stay in that fight for other families. We've made it out. I hope other people are too. So to me, the party sits really firmly in my heart. And
Right.
so it's kind of a part of everything that I do. So when I was 12, when Republicans were trying to pass a bill to take kids with same-sex parents out of our homes, I started knocking on doors. And um, I come from a family where my parents they were teenagers when I was born, right? Like they didn't vote.
Mhm.
It wasn't a thing. And so, for me to be doing that and dragging my parents to vote, I think kind of is a testimony to kind of my
Interesting.
this. So, anyways, I've been a precinct chair. I was a club president of a lot of different clubs, and then I've served as an interim county chair on the SDC. And then in the 2018 election, I was nominated
Right.
for state senate, and that was
I
in.
think that's when I first got to know you.
I think so. I think so. And that was in the most conservative Senate district in the state of Texas where no Democrat had run in 20 years. But it stretched back to my home in East Texas. And I was like, you know what?
Okay.
I'm throwing down. I live in East Dallas, but that district kind of had where I live now and where I grew up. And so I ran and significantly overperformed and just really threw down in an area where folks don't typically throw down. I didn't win, but most of my friends on the ballot did, including the Fifth District Court of Appeals, where our district
Right.
almost perfectly overlapped. So it's just a perfect example of how we're all in a team together and everybody's got a role to play. And
Hmm.
in that election, maybe my role was walking the plank, but if I was going to walk the plank, I was going to do it with the best grace you'd ever seen. And it was, I was really proud of it. So, anyways, during that election, I felt just kind of ignored by the party. When you run in an area that everybody writes off, you're treated like this pariah. Like, why would we waste time? Why would we invest any time or energy in this person? Well, the reason is because I was building lists that the party would never have had access to, and I was performing on a level that we hadn't seen a candidate in a while. No one ever called to ask me how I was doing it. No one ever called to ask what our strategy was. I just got discarded. And there's candidates all over the state who feel that way.
Right.
There's more corners of this state where Democrats are treated that way than not.
Oh
And
yeah. And from my experience as county chair, I think it's starting to get more accepted wisdom now. But I remember back in 14, people were talking about Wendy having coattails, Wendy Davis running for governor, and no, didn't work. What we tried to tell people is it works the other way.
without
And there's data from the 2020 election that shows that people are paying attention to, that shows that in districts where there was a down ballot candidate, even if it was, a red district, Biden did better. So we're starting to, I hope, accept that wisdom that we need candidates all the way down the ballot, even if they're probably not going to win. And, I think there's some respect due people who go into a race for that reason, willing to take one for the team, but knowing it's going to help the rest of the ticket.
Yeah, and it's also
And
really
besides, you don't build a party without candidates.
well, and it's also important that when you have those candidates, you resource them in some way. And
Right, right,
whenever people say that, they think, oh, well, the party doesn't have money to do that. Well, you're correct. The party doesn't have the money to do that. But I didn't say hand them money. I said resource them, right? They need training on how to put a campaign together, how to build a budget, how to build a finance plan. How do you look through all these scores and targeting that's in your van system? How do you cut turf? Like just basic understanding of how to do this to make their jobs easier. But instead, everyone's having to recreate the wheel all over the state. And to me, it's just a testimony of how much we've lost our grassroots roots. Uh,
right,
we now are more focused on paying consultants in Austin and DC than we are in making sure that people on the ground doing the work have the resources they need to succeed. And to me, it's a baseline. Our party's lane is to turn out Democrats. Okay.
right.
And that means filling the 55 vacant county chair seats, where, by the way, that's more than 20% of the counties in Texas have no county chair. Um, and there's 4,500 vacant precinct chair seats. That's half. Okay.
Mm,
Filling those spots and making sure that those people are onboarded, taught what their expectations are, and treated like we're on a team together and not just thrown to the wolves and said, best of luck to you. And then we all sit around complaining that they aren't doing their jobs. They weren't told what their jobs were. I mean,
right,
everyone's on first, nobody's on first, fiefdoms are popping up everywhere, and we need a strong leader who can unify the party and say, hey guys, we're all on the same team together, and what can I do to be helpful? And I
right.
that's what I've always been. And so uniquely
Yeah,
I'm in that position where I think I can be helpful.
yeah. What you're talking about there kind of segues into one of the comments that I've heard others mention about one of your strengths, which can also be viewed, flip side, almost a weakness as well. Uh, as you know, I got to know a lot of county chairs from the smaller counties through my work in the Texas Democratic County Chair Association. And everybody I've talked to who has any interaction with you can't stop talking about all of the times you showed up, helping with fundraising, van, organize, on down the list. Very much hands-on kind of help. On the other hand, that's really not the job of the state party chair in a lot of people's opinion. That person should be more of a manager, leader, fundraiser, rather than hands-on down in the ditches with the folks doing the work. So what's your take on that?
Well, what I'd say is that you deserve a state chair that works as hard as you do.
Right.
And I do all of the things that I do. Now, this position I currently hold is a volunteer position. I have
Hmm.
never even filed for a reimbursement for my mileage. Okay. And
Okay.
I put 35,000 miles on my truck last cycle trying to show up and be helpful. And so my point of that is that that's what I do when I'm not resourced, when I don't have a staff helping me, when I don't have, a team that I'm able to help lead do this. I do think it's the role of the state chair to make sure that our party is helpful. Okay. Maybe that doesn't mean that the state chair has to show up to everything all the time, right? But they
Mm,
should be present. And they should be a person that you feel comfortable calling their office and
right.
saying, man, I'm just really butting my head against a wall right now, and I can't figure out how to get out of issue X. And then we can help direct you to how to get out of it. Right now, Mike, the state party doesn't even have a phone. If you have a problem,
Yeah, that's a sore spot for me too.
I'm just saying, like, maybe everything that I've done isn't the role of the chair, but I haven't been the chair, right?
Right,
I've just
right,
been trying to be helpful, and I'm going to continue trying to be helpful whether I win this race or not. I just think that having someone at the helm of our party who's interested in the success of grassroots activists could go a very long way for us rebuilding this retail politics network around the state that used to exist and has gone defunct.
right. So that kind of leads to my next question about the role of the chair and experience for it. So if I look at what who many people I've talked to view as the top four candidates, you're probably the only one who hasn't actually led for any length of time a county or statewide organization. Um, what would you say to people who have concerns about that?
Well, I have led a county organization. Now, it wasn't for an extended period of time, right?
Right, I said extended period of
Yeah.
time, and it was a smaller county, right?
Well, of course it was.
Okay,
Of course it was.
right.
But my response to that would be, sure, I may not have been the CEO head honcho of all of these statewide organizations, right?
Mm,
But I have been in the room as we have attempted to govern this party for the last 2 to 3 years while I've been one of the vice chairs of the party. Uh,
mm,
I was elected at the 22 convention against establishment. And
right,
and I think most people in the state Democratic Executive Committee are aware of that, and they have seen my pushes for party reform internally. Okay.
right,
There is no learning curve for me to know who the staff are, what their roles are, who the players are around the state. If we were setting up regional councils, I have most of those people sitting in my phone right now, right? I
right, right.
just sprint forward on day one. It is not a question of whether or not I am able to lead this organization.
Okay.
It's just not. And I don't think anybody that has been watching would have that question, especially when I was the guy who spearheaded the most complicated piece of the party is the finances, right? And I'm the guy.
Yeah, and that kind of gets into the whole issue of the transparency between state SDEC to TDP, elected leadership and staff as well. I mean,
Yeah,
sitting on the SDEC, that for a lot of the time we've kind of been in the dark about what's going on.
yeah.
So, yeah,
Well, I mean, well, hang on. The most complicated part of the party is its finances, right?
right.
And I'm the guy who has gone through this budget line by line. There were recommendations that I made when I was just an SDEC member where we helped renegotiate budgets or renegotiate contracts, saving the party hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay.
Right.
I've had a lot of success in helping administrate the party and its finances to today where we have full transparency in these budgets. When you and I were first on the SDEC, Mike, they wouldn't even let us, we weren't allowed to look at budgets before we voted on them. And
Yeah, and we did not get quarterly financial reports either.
yeah, it was obscene.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was ridiculous.
And everybody felt that way and everyone
Mhm,
talked about it, but I'm the one who stepped up to fix it. And I knew that
mhm.
going to be popular
Mhm.
with the establishment class. And I just don't care. We're here to build a transparent party that's accountable, that people can feel comfortable investing their dollars into. And so that was the project that I took on, and we won. Today, every SDEC member gets town halls on budgets before we vote on them. County chairs are invited to those town halls, and we have permanent cyclical auditing, which,
Right.
coming from a party that, Mike, didn't reconcile its bank account. I mean, like
Good Lord.
the measures that we have put into place
Mhm.
to provide professionalism in the party are something I'm very proud of.
Mhm.
And it makes it really challenging for anyone to argue that I couldn't be a solid steward of this party when I'm the guy who's been championing that for a long time.
Right.
So
Well, you're talking about budgets, and budgets are more than just money. They are a reflection, in the national government and state government, they talk about budgets being moral documents. Really, at a more tactical level, a budget reflects the plan of where you want to go, what you want to do with the organization, the kinds of programs you want to put your resources into. So, what do you think we need to be? Sort of broader question. What is the role of the state priority in relation to this whole alphabet soup, and what do you think we need to be doing better?
when you're in a situation like we are, where there are so many organizations out there, okay, it's important that each of these organizations know what their lane is.
Hmm.
And the lane is not putting your thumb on the scale in primaries, in my opinion,
Yeah, yes.
which is what a lot of these alphabet soups like to do.
Oh yeah.
The role of the party is to turn out Democrats. I'm going to give you some numbers. There were 1.3 million people who voted in 2020, but chose not to vote in 2024.
Hmm.
Of that 1.3 million,
And you're talking about Texas.
correct, in Texas, sorry.
Okay. Hmm.
Of that 1.3 million, about 200,000 of them are Republicans, and 1.1 million of them are Democrats.
If you look at the national numbers, which I was doing for another video I'm preparing, it looks like a large chunk of the folks who didn't show up nationally were in Texas,
Not
which
surprising.
just scares the bejesus out of me.
Yeah, I
But on
mean,
the other hand, it's an opportunity.
there's a voter suppression piece there for sure.
Uh-huh.
But it's also, it lies on our shoulders because of, if you take that 1.1 million, they tend to score in our van system of like 70 to 90. They're
Hmm.
people that we would consider solid Democrats. And so what we chose to do this election cycle, it was kind of the common knowledge, was those people are going to show up. It's a presidential year. So let's try to dip lower and pull these lower propensities out. So as a party, we neglected our own people. We took them for granted. And so that is the lesson to learn. When we talk about what the lane of the party is, it's to make sure that our Democrats feel engaged, feel like they're being asked for their vote, and that we're soliciting that and making sure that they show up. Because if we can't turn out our Democrats, we can't grow to flip the state as it is. And so to answer your question about the alphabet soup, we got to know what our lane is. That's what I view our lane as. We got to get our people back and make sure that they become reliable. And that means a tonal shift, that means a messaging shift, and that means a shift in the way that we campaign and the way we operate. I hope I've shown that I'm a person willing to take on reforms.
Right. The whole thing that happened last year, as you describe it, it seems like we go through cycles of forgetting what we're supposed to be doing. Like when I first got active as a camp, well, actually, way before that, when I was first tasked with chairing our quarterly campaign committee in Collin County back in 2010, we had this grid that I'm sure everybody knows about, which has turnout on one X axis and party leanings on the other axis. And we were told the job of the party is to really focus on the Democrats likely to vote. And then as you have more resources, get into the lower propensity voters. You don't forget that core. You need to touch them. Um, you can't put all your resources into the lower part. lower propensity voters, which seems to have, been in vogue now and then. But I don't know, maybe last year was different just with the change at the top of the ticket. Who knows? But what you're touching on there through that answer is we need to do a better job, I think, paraphrasing is when it comes election time, running the coordinated campaign across the state with a clear focus that the party's job, all the way down through the county and the precinct chair level, is to get the Democratic base out. The
Right.
persuadable and, add on the lower propensity voters as we have time, and the persuadables are really the role of the candidates, which is what the traditional model has been. So that's kind of
Well,
the campaign stuff. And
I'll make a point, Mike. Nobody can persuade people like the candidate
oh
can.
yeah,
No
right.
Republican is going to be like, well, you know what? I'll vote Democrat this time because the Democratic Party told me to. That's not how that's going to work ever.
No.
The candidate to come to their door or meet them face to face. And usually it's a situation where they say, well, I'm voting for all the other Republicans, but I'll vote for this one Democrat. And then
Absolutely.
over time, you win them over. Our focus as a party needs to be turning out our Democrats, and we haven't been doing it. And
Yeah.
so to
Yeah.
me, that's the lane, and you do that through building up your organizational infrastructure and changing the way that we're targeting.
Okay. Right. So then, of course, we're talking about fundraising, budgeting, and actually implementing the strategy. This takes money, of course. So, some of the other candidates have a good story to tell about large donor fundraising. I think you've done some of that yourself, but for a sustaining basis, I think everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, there's widespread agreement that the sustaining model ought to be from small donors. So this is like grassroots uh, development and donors. So what can you tell me about your work with the party and any PACs and candidates you've worked with for both small dollar and large dollar fundraising?
Yeah, as you may remember, Mike, whenever I became vice chair for finance, this was the lane that I chose to get into was
Hmm.
sustaining member program.
Right,
The reason is because I felt like we had neglected it as a party, and it takes a lot of cultivation. The reason that people don't focus all their time and energy on it is because it takes time to build it. But the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time's today. And it
right.
was time for us to start really hammering down on it. Today, the party has gotten up to about 3,500 sustaining donors, which I think in the state of Texas is still way too low. I'd like to
Oh
see
yeah,
it up at least to about 10,000. That's kind of the goal that I have in my head. If we get there and maintain our average contributions, it would fund what our budget is for the party right now. And
uh,
that's before you even ask for a big dollar check. What's the consequence of that? The consequence of that is that after election, you don't have to scramble to lay off staff
right.
because you have sustaining dollars coming through. There's also a messaging component.
And that comes to one of my pet peeves and high priorities in getting out of SDEC is staff retention.
Correct. You maintain better staff retention. You can do year-round organizing, migrating with the constituency caucuses, which I'd like to talk about at some point. But there's a piece of it that people don't think about as much, and that's the messaging component. Okay.
Right.
What
Hmm.
does it mean when we're funded by people on the ground instead of by a handful of donors? What it means is that that handful of donors does not get to tell us what to talk about and what not to talk about. Okay.
Yeah, we both know that with big money comes strings.
Correct. And when we're funded by people on the ground, that means that the people drive our messaging and that the people drive what we do. I think it's a very high priority to focus on. And I've brought our sustaining membership program a very long way. Frankly, it's how we're paying the bills right now in the party, where we've been kind of rudderless since the beginning of November when our chair announced this weird 6-month resignation. Right.
Right.
And so I want to focus a lot on continuing to build that. I want to get that number up. If we have about 10,000 people that come to a convention, I don't know, that sounds like low hanging fruit to get sustaining members,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Good number. So there's that bucket. Then there's the bucket of big dollar donors, which I've done that before. In this election, I've raised about 1.1 million. In the 22 cycle, I raised about 1.6. I understand that that's not 40, 50 million dollars, but it shows I've got you some fundraising chops. Okay. And I know
Hmm.
how to utilize it to be helpful. That's about building relationships with people and making sure they
Right.
comfortable with the organization. And right
Uh,
now, it's tough to get people to write large checks to the organization because a lot of people don't view it as an organization with a strong strategic plan and a strong
right.
strategy to move forward. Um, the month after this chair's election will probably be the most crucial month of the Texas Democratic Party in the last 30 years. It's going to be the time that people decide, is the party under new management and we're willing to move forward and we're willing to reevaluate, hit a reset button and try to move forward? Or is it more of the same of what we've always been doing? And I have to tell you, I'm bringing us in a direction that is different. And I know that can be scary to some people. But if we are going to continue doing what we've always done, then we should expect to continue to lose. And so to me, hitting that tonal shift in that month where we go around and reset with our electeds and with our big donors, that's how we start unlocking larger dollars. And that there's still a space for that. And we need to make sure we're cultivating it. Then the third
Right.
bucket that you have is things like endowments and
Oh
estate,
yeah.
which
Mm.
we as a party have never talked about. I'd love to get the financing where we can bring in someone from nonprofit financial management to start talking about, if you own a bunch of buildings and you're about to pass away, would you leave one of those buildings to us so that people can have,
Somebody reminded me that the state party used to be funded in large part by a trust.
and we spent it. And by we, that was before me. It was,
Okay.
and
So rather than just drawing off the interest, we spent the principal.
imagine if someone was worth $100 million and when they
Mhm.
passed, we were able to get them to leave the Texas Democratic Party $5 million.
Right.
Suddenly, you have three endowments that would perpetually fund director positions. And if you could get that in all your director spots, now what a world we're living in where we don't have to
Right.
stress out about paying our director staff and we have our sustaining donors up to 10,000 and we have reset all of our relationships with big dollar donors. It puts us in a very different situation. One more point on this because I know you want to move on to another topic.
Right.
35. I turned 35 last week. Okay.
Happy birthday.
I would
Yeah,
think,
I was there. Remember the cake.
yeah, I would be the first chair under the age of 40, which is how our party classifies young.
Yeah. Mhm.
I'd be the first under 40 chair of our party since Jim Lindsay in 1956. Okay.
Yeah.
And what
That's a long time ago.
and what that means is that assuming that my heart and my liver holds up, I'll
Mhm.
be around in 40 years to reap the benefits of what we build today.
Right.
And that's really important to me. I want to be able to look back and say, look what we built. Look what we did. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be in this fight and I want to lay the groundwork now.
Right.
And to me, I think that that's a pretty convincing argument for why I am so vested in a strong party
Hmm.
in building infrastructure for down the road, not just spending for today to make ourselves look good. It's
Right.
about investing. Our party's been here for 200 years. We're going to be here for 200 more, God willing, and the creek don't rise. And
Yep.
and it's important that we're planning for that. I can't believe we don't own the headquarters that the Texas Democratic Party is in. I can't.
Yeah, well, that's believable considering the finances over the last several years. Um, you talked a little bit about the first month. I kind of want to cast this question of, we talk about president's first 100 days. So, aside from what you just mentioned, what else would you plan on having happen? Are you personally doing in the first 100 days?
So we already kind of talked about that piece, so I'll move on.
Okay.
But I'll say, I think my number one thing that I want to do that has just been a thing that's been itching me for years is that if you're in the private sector, which I've spent time in corporate private world, uh,
Mm,
you have onboarding when you join an organization. And
right.
onboarding tells you company culture, what your expectations are, what your resources are, who's calling the shots, all that good stuff. We don't have that. And so if
Right.
you join the organization as a precinct chair, a county chair, an SDC member, you're just thrown to the wolves and you're said, go, good luck, have fun. And you don't even know what your job is necessarily. Some people
Mhm.
don't even know what a precinct chair is, and they're sitting in a place where they have a vacant precinct chair spot. And so to me, the very first thing I want to do, permanent quarterly onboarding. For
Mhm.
the first year, everybody's going to want to go through it. And then after that first year, it is standing on the calendar every quarter
Right.
that if a new person joins the organization through whatever means, here is the next onboarding training. We'd love to have you there. And it starts to set a tone that we're on a team. We have expectations, that we have a goal. There was a county chair in Dallas County named Darlene Ewing.
Oh
And
yeah, I knew Darlene.
in Dallas County, we have like 450, 500 precincts.
Mhm.
And what she would do every new CEC term is she would put a book together, a hard book that had like how to do your job as a precinct chair, but the top page would have data on your precinct, how many votes you turned out, how many votes we need from your district, what does the scoring look like in your district, demographics of your district, things like that. If she could do that for 500 precincts, we should be able to do that for
Oh yeah. Yeah, I
254
agree
counties
completely.
and say, here's the commissioner's district that we think is the most winnable. If you only have one candidate that you can recruit, don't put them at county judge, put them in that commissioner's seat. Like put some plans together so that we're being strategic and thinking down the road. So that's to me, number one is onboarding. Uh, Number two is reassembling the training department. Um, this is
Yeah.
where I think I'm also kind of unique is that I've done corporate training before and
Mhm.
you don't have to hire corporate train or training staff with me. Maybe that's one of the roles of the chair because people want to see a very public facing chair that is present in your community. Maybe it's
Mhm.
going around and helping to lead these trainings. In addition to raising the money and doing, I'm saying on top of those things, it's
Right.
if we're going to have conversations about paying the chair, which passed at that convention, and we're talking about doing that in 20 after the 26th convention, then the
Yeah.
chair needs to have a role that is a full-time permanent what's your lane. Maybe that
Mhm.
makes a lot of sense for me. In addition to some of the other items. But I think reassembling this training department where people know where they can go to get these resources, high priority. We've already talked about the financial piece that I think is kind of crucial here. And then we need to talk a lot about data. We're in an off year.
Right. Right.
We're in an off year, and there aren't a lot of conversations about data happening right now. Imagine all this public data we have of who state employees and things are. We don't have that in our systems. So you can't even pull a list of federal or state employees in Van and try to message to them or recruit them to be candidates because they've been laid off, right? Uh,
Right. So I understand part of the issue here is that we get the voter file from the state, supplemented sometimes by the county data. And then the DNC adds a whole lot of data from God knows where. Um, Phone numbers from various vendors who, try to do the matching, which isn't always great. And then we hope augment that with actual data from the field. So given that a lot of the data comes from elsewhere, how would you go about filling some of the holes?
so I served on a rural data subcommittee where we kind of dove into some of this. And what was really surprising to me was how lightly the in the field organizing data augments. So like you could knock on a door and they say, I'm a Democrat through and through. I always vote Democrat. I'm showing up. And you log that in your system. And they could still be scored as a Republican and it doesn't augment in the same way because it's this trash in, trash out policy where it's like, well, you don't want somebody to come in and put a bunch of faulty data in that messes up your numbers. But there's got to be some give or take there because if we're out canvassing and putting data into our systems, that data should count for something and should inform our systems in a more heavy way.
So what you're telling me is what you guys found out is so for those who a little bit down in the weeds, but for those who are not familiar with the voter activation network, VAN, which everybody talks about, in addition to the hard data, name, address, voting, public voting history, all of that stuff, phone numbers, there is and canvassing history. What there are is various indices, guesses about turnout likelihood and partisanship. And last time I looked, depending on what county or campaign you're in, you could have like three or four different models that they pull this data from. So what you're telling me is if somebody's going out, knock on my next door neighbor's house, say Van has them recorded as 20% likely to be Democratic, according to the Civis model or whatever it is. Knock on the door, tells the canvasser, I'm 100% Democrat. I always vote down the ballot. I just almost never vote in primaries. They could still show up in the targeting score as Republican.
Yes. And
Oh, that's crap.
well, well, they don't want people messing with the data. Like there's some complexities here to data science, right?
Oh,
But my
yeah.
but my point in a lot of this is it's another way we kind of disrespect our grassroots organizers, right?
Yeah,
Where
to get around that, you'd almost have to code queries where, you ignore the targeting data or you override it with the canvas history.
it,
And that's not the kind of thing that most precinct chairs are able to do.
and as a side note, I know this is super in the weeds, but I think that this is kind of one of my points is that I'm able to get super in the weeds because I've done
Right.
like that. And so, I could probably write you a 500-page novel about my opinions on the party and what we're doing. And this is just kind of one section of it that we gotta find some way for our data to be able to reflect the work that has already been done.
Right.
Especially if you're sending Democrats to doors and they say to go F yourself, I'm voting for Republicans, but we have them on our thing as a Democrat.
I've
Let's
run into that.
It happens a lot. And
Hmm.
like we just continue sending Democrat canvassers to their doors. We never update our data to inform itself on that. So,
Yeah,
there's a
I,
lot we haven't been very data forward, and I do think it's not sexy, but it's crucial.
well, maybe sexy depending on who you are. Yes, there's some data geeks and computer nerds out there. Before we wrap up, I want to shift gears a little bit and just talk about you a little more personally. I'm asking every candidate this. I'd ask you introvert or extrovert, but it's pretty obvious to me you're more extroverted. How do
You
you
know,
see yourself?
I'll tell you, I think most people view me as an extrovert because I do
Right,
genuinely, I like people. Okay.
right. Hmm.
I think it depends on how you categorize what an introvert or an extrovert is.
Well,
And
the working definition I usually use is the extrovert gets energized off of being around other people, more backslapping, hi, how are you, all of that. The
yeah,
introvert can do that, but after a certain period of time, they have to say, I need to stay home and recharge tonight.
yeah, and that's what I was going to say. That's kind of my definition. And if that's the definition, I'm quite an introvert. I requ
Okay.
I require a
An
lot of
extroverted introvert.
Yeah, I require a lot of alone time. I do
Mm,
that usually really late at night. I don't sleep very well. I've never been a good sleeper. So usually I clack through my emails at like 2, 3, 4 in the morning. You'll get
oh, good
stuff.
Lord.
But I require a lot of alone time, a lot of kind of recharge time. Regardless, I do like people a lot and I like being around. I love interacting. So it's kind of this weird thing where I've got a bit of a personality of an extrovert, but I kind of garner energy the way of an introvert.
Okay, fair enough. You talked a little bit about doing some work in the private sector. When asked about what you do for a living, I think I remember you mentioned land business. So, for the people who don't know, what do you do to support yourself? What is your business?
Yeah, so let me just kind of talk to you about my career. Uh,
Okay.
when I was in high school, I waited tables at a dairy, or didn't wait. I managed a Dairy Queen. Okay, then when I went to
Oh,
college,
managed a Dairy Queen.
managed a Dairy Queen, and I
All I did was dip ice cream in the Brahms.
and hey, don't get on Brahms, okay? Dairy Queen. Uh, and then whenever I went to college, I transferred to the Dairy Queen there, and I waited tables
Mhm.
at a restaurant in Trinity, Texas. And
Okay.
at the time, I was really, I mean, I've always been really involved in politics. A city councilman told me to sit down and shut up, so I filed to run against him. And at the time, I was Dairy Queen and waiting tables, and I filed to run for city council. And, while I was in the middle of one of those races, the restaurant I worked at shut down. And I
Oops.
was like, oh God, what am I going to do? I'm 20 years old and like I'm trying to get through college. I shouldn't have been doing all this, but I've got all this on my plate and all these responsibilities now. But how am I going to pay my rent? And my friend was working at an apartment complex where she was the leasing manager. And she said, well, I mean, if you want to come and lease apartments, you're welcome to come being a leasing agent. And I said, okay, let's do it. Whatever, I'm in. Let's go. So I started selling apartments. I was pretty good at it. And really quickly, I just kind of rose through up to management. And uh, the community that I helped manage was 840 units, which is like a small town, right?
Hmm.
And I really learned project management there because it was student housing, 840 people that all have their broken pipes and
and,
everything
and
they
a highly transient population.
yeah, yeah, where you have to turn over every apartment every year, right?
Hmm.
And so I was really good at that project management, and they promoted me to being a property manager. So I managed another property where we did a full interior exterior rehab. Then they brought me to corporate where I did community services and compliance work. Um, and then I did that for several years, and it I was kind of over it. It just wasn't my thing. There was some differences that I had with leadership there. And so then I went and worked for a real estate analytics company. And I really
Oh,
loved
okay.
it. I really enjoyed it. And I made decent money there. It was the first time I'd ever really kind of made decent money of any sort.
Then there we get into the data piece.
Yeah, and I was really understanding kind of the back ends of how much of that operates because I really like to know how things work. Uh,
Hmm.
that's an important piece for me. And then while I was there, I was like, you know what? I'm going to start this little land business. So I started buying and selling land, and now I have a land acquisitions company where I buy and sell land. It's not anything giant. I don't do it in places like Dallas. I'll never be able to afford that, right? But
Hmm.
we do what we can to get through, and it allows me to play politics. And so that's kind of
Okay.
I played a little bit of a stint where I did some political consulting on accident. There was just no talent for available because there just was such a lack of staff, which is another conversation to be had. My
And
former
this was got you to Armadillo Strategies.
Yeah, and like
Mm.
there's I have all my formalized training is in the political space, and
Mm.
everybody was just itching to try to find people to work with, and there weren't a lot, and so I accidentally did that for a bit, and then whenever I got elected as vice chair for finance, I was like, it's probably inappropriate to be doing some of that, so
Okay.
I shut that so I don't consult with candidates anymore because I don't think that's appropriate. But so my land acquisitions is kind of where I'm operating these days, and my wife is a mental health professional at Children's down.
Okay.
She works at the foster care clinic in Dallas, and
Mm.
so we just kind of you know try to do the best we can, and I play
Mm.
politics pretty much full time.
Okay. So that gets to, I guess, one of the more difficult topics that have come up around you. Your work in the land business led to your getting on the Dallas Central Appraisal District, right? And
I would
that,
I wouldn't say that that led to that. I would say
oh,
that
well, common interest, I'll put it that way.
well, whenever the number one, the only land that I own in Dallas County is my own home. Okay.
Okay, fair
Uh,
enough. But you kind of know
but
the business.
no, for sure. I mean,
Yeah, right.
every person who runs for office, I would hope that they know the business that they're
Right, right.
whenever the legislature created the appraisal district positions, it was an attempt of Republicans to defund public schools. What they were trying to do was
That makes sense.
they were trying to get appraisal districts to artificially underappraise properties. And when they're artificial, you only get a 10% window from the state. And if you artificially underappraise and the state catches it, they're going to come back and they're going to fine your local school jurisdictions to offset the difference of the money. And so they were wanting to get people to artificially underappraise so that they could take more money from your community schools. And when I found out they were doing it, I was like, oh, no, 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 no. We're not doing that. I work with appraisal districts and titles and things all the time. This is something that makes a lot of sense. I'm also a big public schools advocate. I'm in. And we stopped it from happening in Dallas County. Tarrant County's got a problem on their hands, and you can research and find some of the news stories about that. In about 5 years, you're going to see huge problems with school funding in places like Tarrant County because they have an appraisal district run amok.
Mm.
And luckily, I kind of jumped in to make sure that we were protecting our local jurisdictions here in Dallas County. Had to
Okay.
really brush up on tax code, which is something I didn't know a lot about, and had to learn on it real fast. But that's kind of where I've always been. That's always been my role. Put me in, coach. Like I'll figure it out and I'll learn it. And that was
Okay.
that made the most sense because professionally I understand that industry, and there was a spot open to do it.
Okay, so that leads to my next question. One of the reasons I wanted to do these interviews was to give candidates a chance to really get into and address some of the concerns about them. So I'm sure you're aware, acutely aware, of the concerns that have been raised about your serving on the appraisal district and running for state party chair. I, I full disclaimer, I'm not an attorney. I've read stuff, I've talked to attorneys, and like, I don't know. Um, I guess what I'd like to hear from you is the current status of your response to those concerns. Uh, let's hear that first.
Well, yeah, there was an eligibility concern about me holding
Mhm,
public office. And just for a frame of reference, there are
mhm.
states where sitting electeds serve as their party chairs, okay? That is not out of the ordinary. But in Texas, there is a law that says that you can't hold a state, county, or federal office.
Yeah, I might point out too that somebody pointed out to me yesterday that of the leading four candidates, you might not be the only one with this problem.
I'm not familiar with what you're referencing.
Okay.
So, I, but regardless, you can't hold a state, county, or federal office in Texas. That's in the code. Um,
Mm,
the office I hold is not a state, county, or federal office.
it's like
It's a
political,
political subdivision.
right?
Uh, this has been there have been opinions made on this. There have
Hmm.
been rulings on this. They have never been challenged because it is
Okay.
there is there is no one would argue a city is a political subdivision of the state. A
Hmm.
school district is a political subdivision of the state. That doesn't mean that a person who is your city council person is also a state officer. Okay. A
Right.
political subdivision just means it is a governmental entity that is not the state, but within the state. And so uh, this has already been litigated. In my opinion, it's kind of a political ploy to try to get me off the ballot. But the reality is, if somebody wants to win an election, they're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way and win votes.
Yeah.
You shouldn't try to do it on technicalities. There is no eligibility concern. We are filing all of that in and having those discussions with the TDP attorney and with Chairman Hinojosa. And I've already been formally nominated by the nominations committee and
Right.
ruled eligible. So it's a non-issue, and that's fine. If folks want to play that way, they are welcome to do that. What I'm focused on is how we build a Texas Democratic Party that can win.
Right.
I'm looking forward. I hope to earn votes along the way to be able to do that. That's my priority.
I think one of my concerns is I'm kind of a low drama person, notwithstanding the fact that I've been involuntarily involved in more drama than I care to be in the past. Um, I think for better or worse, however, this Chairman Hinojosa rules, or if he doesn't rule, somebody at the SDC meeting on the 29th is going to raise their hand and either object to your candidacy or object to Hinojosa's ruling, whichever way it goes. Uh, and as much as I don't like the idea of that happening, I think it's going to be decided by a floor vote. I'm with you. I would rather see the question resolved on the merits and on the law rather than on whether or not somebody likes Kendall. Uh, but I just don't like to see it coming to that. Now, it has been suggested by some people in order to avoid the drama that you could just resign from the appraisal district. What's your take on that?
I don't think that avoids any drama. That is not
Okay,
that to me
fair
that
enough. Fair enough.
it's a red herring, right? If people want to try to pull weird technicalities that actually aren't written in law and are in no way accurate, they are welcome to do that. I am focused on this race. I'm focused on the party. Earlier in our conversation, you had a note about navel gazing. That's kind of okay. I,
Right.
to me, like I just don't, I'm not interested in spending a whole lot of time entertaining a bunch of that because it's just nonsense. And I think when it's outlined in code and statute for folks, which is what we're in the process of assembling, it's going to be very clear for folks if
Right.
it isn't already. What we need to do is rebuild a Texas Democratic Party that is worthy of the grassroots, that is focused on grassroots organizing around the state, that is built to win elections. And that is what my priority is. That's what I'm here to talk about. And that's how I intend to earn the votes to win this race.
Okay. Um, that pretty much gets down the list of questions that I had, and I think I hit everything that you wanted to talk about. And any other words you'd like to say in closing?
Um, I just appreciate you doing this, Mike. I think that anytime that there's a format that I get to drone on about the Democratic Party, it's great because I'm not afraid to have conversations about minutia of the party. It's something I know extremely well. But where I'm a little bit unique is I hope people see not only do I know the party really well, I also am not afraid to reform the party, and I've shown it.
Right.
And I think it takes a party who knows it, and or it takes a person who knows it and knows how it works to be able to reform it in a way that's effective and helpful. And that's just where I'm unique in this field. And I hope that people see it that way. My granddaddy always used to tell me that there's always going to be somebody more handsome than me, or that has more money than me, or that's smarter than me, but I'm the one who gets to decide if they outwork me. And frankly, Mike, there isn't a person out there that's going to outwork me because there isn't enough hours in the day. There just aren't. I mean, I work my ass off, and I hope people see it, and I hope people will give me an opportunity to help lead them to rebuilding this party. And thank you for letting us talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I mean, in case I didn't make this clear up front, this is primarily for SDECIN members who might care to watch who don't have the chance to really talk with you one-on-one very much. But I'm also doing this for all of their constituents because believe me, just about everybody I know is hearing from their constituents about who they like and who they don't. And what I've observed is the people in Houston have their favorite candidate, and the people in East Texas and Dallas have their favorite candidate. So one of the things I'd like to do is for the constituents to kind of broaden their horizons to let them know the other candidates more in depth. And I appreciate your sitting down for this.
Well, speaking of constituents, Mike, I'm your constituent, and I want you to vote for Kendall Scudder.
Message received. Thank you, sir.
I
All
appreciate
right.
it. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thanks very much. And have a safe travel out to the forum in Lubbock.
Yes, sir. We'll talk
Yeah.
to you soon.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye bye.